My name is Miles Bould. I'm a percussionist drummer. One half of USONiC, the writers, and the other half is Scott Firth, bass player, guitarist.
What kind of band is USONiC? If no one's heard USONiC, what kind of music is it?
It's world fusion jazz. You could put it in any order, but that's basically a fairly decent description of what it is. So it's world music influences. As a percussionist, I love music from all around the world, so it's very rhythmically based. There's a lot of jazz influence in terms of the chordal structure and the structure of the arrangements of the songs, and the fusion element is the mixing of those two together, I suppose.
So how did it come about that you and Scott, both being the rhythm section, usually not the frontmen of the band, are actually the founding members of the band? And just tell me a little bit about how that came to be.
I think it's just being on common ground, rhythmically, musically. Just Scott and I connect. It's almost something I couldn't necessarily put into words, but we just connect. We've worked a lot together in many different scenarios. Through all of those, we've always wanted to do this, what we're doing now. This is, for us, the sort of definitive version of what we're really about. It throws just about everything in to what we're about musically. So it's drawing from everything, from the pop sessions we do to the jazz sessions we do. It's passion for music, passion for a certain type of music or certain types of musics, i.e. the jazz and the world music. But it includes funk, hip hop, everything. But it's us defining ourselves as well.
Could you just define for me what USONiC means as a word?
I've had this question before, and I don't know that I can answer it. It suits the mood. There isn't actually a definitive thing behind that. So
right.
That's
I mean, is it a word you made up, or can I look it up in the dictionary?
You can't look it up in the dictionary.
Oh, really?
No, it's a word I made up, having, like many bands, rifled through many ideas and thinking what even remotely describes what we are. It's as much as I like the way it looks.
Introduce me to who the members of USONiC are.
The members of USONiC are Scott Firth, as I said, guitar and bass. Marc Guillemot, who's a great French guitarist, writer in his own right, who's playing lead guitar. There's Nigel Hitchcock, fantastic saxophone player. Robert Mitchell, great keyboard player, composer as well. They're all great composers. And then Sarah Ozell, a great singer, also a composer, piano player as well, and writer. And just important to include as well that we, on the DVD, on part of the session, we had the fantastic Gary Husband, who's a very special musician, and quite a lot of people will know of him in particular. Where do I start with what he's done? He's an amazing drummer. Played in a band of friends of mine, a band called Level 42. He took over a very big drum chair in Phil Gould, and Gary did an amazing job, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of what he can do. He's worked with McLaughlin, you name it, and is an amazing writer in his own right, and a phenomenal piano player, synth player. And he came and guested. And
out of your band members, where I have heard some of these people play? If I don't know them by name, would I know their music?
Nigel has done all manner of things. He's an amazing, very accomplished musician, and has done quite a lot of. I mean, he's worked with Tom Jones, James Brown. I mean, he's done incredible. In his youth, he worked from the age of like 16, 17. He was already doing sessions in London for anything from a Kellogg's cornflakes advert to film scores, and has been doing that all his life, a bit like myself. Scott, you will have heard from the extremes of playing bass with the Spice Girls, to Joan On My Trading, to currently he's actually the bass player in the band The Pill, John Lydon's band The Pill.
Right, yeah.
So, he again, across many sort of genres and influences from everywhere. Sarah has written a lot of music for library, written a lot of songs, pop songs. She's got quite a lot of music over in the States on soundtracks for television programs, and I think possibly a few movie scores as well. She was a signed artist-writer, but she's more into production and writing songs now and singing on things that she particularly wants to sing on, as opposed to performing as a sort of solo artist. But she's done backing vocals for Jamiroquai, Robert, the keyboard player, is very deeply steeped in jazz, to a degree, as is Nigel, although Nigel's done a broad brush of things, but Nigel's also known in the sort of hardcore jazz world, as is Robert. He was in a band many years ago called Quite Sane. He also worked with Courtney Pine a lot, many other people, but I'll cite those two as people that people might have heard, things that people might have heard of. But Robert does his own stuff. He's pretty much functioning as a jazz solo artist himself. So we're very lucky to have him, because he has a lot of time where he's doing his own things, but he graciously comes in and works with us. So.
And is the writing then predominantly you and Scott? Is that?
It is, yeah. I mean, we love to include everyone, and everyone's influence is so strong that they help steer the ship in great directions. But Scott and I tend to be the ones who write the bass of things. Mark, the guitarist, has also played quite a strong part in the writing of some of the tunes, particularly some of the tunes on this DVD. And he's of a very similar mind as a writer. Sonically, he knows the music really, really well.
One might even say USONically.
I like what you did there.
I take it.
So yeah, but predominantly it's me and Scott, and we will take it to as far as we feel we can. Mostly we write the melodies, and we structure the songs chordally and rhythmically, and then we kind of throw it to the room, as you do, and everyone brings their fantastic self to it. You know, great soloing from Robert, Nigel and Mark in particular, and now Sarah's sort of inclusion. She just adds that gorgeous kind of tone to the melody. She sings a lot of the melodies, and it just brings something a little bit special for me. You know, we're not the first to do it, but having watched many other bands do that kind of thing, have vocalists not sing songs but sing the melodies and integrate with saxophones and interesting guitar sounds. She brings something really, you know, special to the party, I think, you know, and I wouldn't say softens the edge, but sort of details actually what we're trying to do in a really nice way, because we love vocals as well. And we're all used to singing, working with singers and compensating singers and compensating singers. Complimenting.
I'm sure there is.
Singers, yeah. There's many a singer I had to compensate. No, complimenting a song, which is really important. You know, it keeps you in check. It's not all about 8 gazillion notes, as many a musician will tell you. It's about the melody and the composition more over than maybe the endless soloing and whatever. We are at Steve Winwood's studio in Wiltshire, and the reason we're there is, well, on the good grace of Steve, and also James Towler, the excellent engineer who's engineered all of this for us. Thank you, James. And Scott and I in particular have done sessions down there. I work with a singer-songwriter called Mary Lay down there on an album with him, and done a few other bits and pieces. And Scott, many years ago, played with Steve Winwood, so they've built up a rapport, and he very kindly said, yeah, come to the studio. They knew it was a nice environment for us to do our thing. It's an opportunity I couldn't say no to, really, so that's been fantastic to play in such a beautiful place, and you know, do our thing in that environment, yeah.
What I'd like to find out a little bit, and I'm sure everyone else will be very interested to hear, is where the influences have come to you guys, and you in particular.
Yeah.
Not who you want to copy or emulate, but just who has been an inspiration.
Well, I'd probably have to admit to wanting to emulate to a degree. I think it would be folly not to. But it's pure flattery and passion and love. Probably the first music I heard that really rocked my world is going to be no surprise to you, which is sort of Weather Report. Yeah. So that just rocked my world, and I listened to Weather Report and everything they ever did obsessively, and, you know, blame my father for giving me the records, and then coming into my room and going, you know, are you still listening to that bloody record? You know, yeah, I am. You know, obsessed about it, like you do, like musicians obsessed about Hendrix or anything else. You know, just absolutely loved it. Deeply personally, I think it's actually quite hard to maybe explain why I would get so moved by it. You just get moved by things like you do. Moved by a story, moved by, you know, something very particular to you. But sort of mechanically, if I can answer it that way, as a percussionist, which is what I was becoming, I'd learnt to play a bit of saxophone and clarinet, and wasn't necessarily totally sure what instrument I was going to pick, but I was tapping and beating the crap out of everything, realising that, oh, I must be some form of a drummer. As soon as that started to really kick in, certain records I started to tune into because I started listening for the percussion. And something about the great percussionists in Weather Report resonated with me. That's about as detailed as I could perhaps explain it. Then I started, you know, listening to the broader picture and started wanting to know where this fantastic mood was coming from, and it wasn't all just from the percussion and the rhythmic element. It was from what Zaun was doing. It was what all the musicians were doing, and it was jazz, but other. It was like jazz with other influences from all around the world, and I would go off in my mind to Indonesia in my head. I'd be like, where's that? That track sounds like I'm in another place. I know even I think Wayne Shorter was trying to describe their music and touched on the whole feels like a music from another world, another place, which is just absolutely resonates with me. It's like being on another planet sometimes.
So sort of capture your imagination.
Totally. And took me on a journey, and I would often maybe even create a story in some of the tunes. I'm going to struggle to think of a tune now. The melodies, I absolutely love the sense of the melodies. I love the way they use vocal on some of the melodies. I just love the synth sounds, and strangely connected it to other synth players that are not necessarily related to Zaunel, but there was a Japanese guy called Tomita. When I was even younger, my dad played me some records by him, and Tubular Bells of all things. You know, just the soundscaping that you get in movies. That something about the otherworldliness of the music.
Having been influenced by bands of yesteryear, like Weather Report in particular, are you following and pushing that progressiveness forward, or is it a nostalgic, reflective band, USONiC, you know, reflecting on what has gone before?
It is a very potent question. Like I said, I'd like to think I'm adding to a bit of a progression in the music, but there's absolutely no doubt that there's something about what they were doing, the freedom they had maybe at that time. Sometimes I think I'm not the only one in the band that thinks, oh, it would have been great to have been born maybe 20 years before and been around in that time. You know, Miles Davis, what he did on the corner and all those, and many other artists, but you know, Miles is famously recognised as adding quite a potent DNA for this type of music. There was a groove to what Weather Report did that resonates particularly with me, because although I'm into jazz and world music and everything else, which includes reggae, salsa, Latin jazz, Indian music, African music, everything, the groove of it is paramount to me. I strive to make everything swing and groove. That's my particular passion. No surprise, I'm a drummer, and that's what I'm trying to achieve, and support the musicians in that way. And I want to bring all those influences in. And Weather Report did that in spades, as far as I'm concerned. There's an element of maybe slightly more modern groove to what we're doing now. I'm trying to incorporate what's happening musically now. I'm touching on it. I mean, there's, you know, modern influence in there.
For the future of USONiC, what would people, what would you want your audience and your fan base to maybe expect to come up next?
If they've liked what we've done so far, that we're able to keep that spirit, that we can evolve and embrace various, perhaps new music that may get written. It's a strange thing to say to a degree. I mean, there are only a certain amount of notes, but every generation basically processes those notes slightly differently, and eventually something new kind of comes. I hope that some of what we're doing, there is something new coming out of it. I mean, we don't write very complex chord structures in a lot of our music. To a degree, that's probably my influence, because I'm so concerned about the rhythmic element, and I'm not a keyboard composer. I'm very much a self-taught musician, and I rely on the other guys. But I think it's a common understanding that we don't want to overcomplicate the music where possible. Although it can sound very complicated, often it's not based around as many complex chords as some other jazz is. Again, it's a head nod to the simpler things that I like, the reggae and simpler groove-based music.
Modern jazz, the technical ability is a sort of forefront element of it. Yeah. And this sort of exploration of music and breaking boundaries. In a sense, you could compare it to, let's say, contemporary dance, where if you watched some dance, you might think, God, that looks it's quite alienating if you don't know the process.
Absolutely.
And in what way, for somebody who doesn't know modern jazz, how would you try to describe it to them to make it inviting and say, actually, this isn't as alienating as it might first appear?
I probably couldn't talk somebody into liking it, but I could say what influences are there. But what I hope when somebody either listens to the album or hopefully comes to see a gig, we sort of talk about this a lot. I mean, you can do a lot of sitting there kind of going, you know, oh yeah, that's really intelligent, that's really clever, that's really out there. And for serious musicians, they will hear those perhaps more complex patterns. What I hope is that people who come to the gig are actually sitting there and they're doing this. They're going, I don't know why my neck's going, but I'm digging this. It's got enough groove to it sort of embrace me and bring me in and make me think, yeah, I mean, there is a vocal element to it now, but they're actually just musically thinking, for some reason I'm doing this. I'm not just sitting there thinking this is an intellectual process happening with a bunch of musicians who don't really concern with what's happening in the rest of the room. I mean, we are very serious when we're doing it, and we look pretty serious when we're doing it, and we're concentrating because we're trying to deliver a good message. But I actually hope, you know, part of the getting up and doing your thing, especially in a gig environment, is that you're actually trying to bring the audience in. I want to take them on a journey, and I want them to feel like they've moved and that they've felt the music. I don't think I'm alone in that at all, but in jazz it can get a little bit ambiguous. People can, you know...
so you want it to be accessible?
Definitely.
Yeah,
I think it can be. I think, you know, we're not the only ones doing that kind of thing, and we're trying to convey that there is, you know, jazz music is so complex and not for others. It's a bit like classical music. You play classical music to a baby, they invariably dig it. They don't understand it, but they like it.
I think something that we've spoken about before is the fact that modern jazz could be equated to the sort of haute couture of fashion. That it is sort of paving the way of creation in music that then can be filtered down to what people buy in the high street. And that maybe a lot of hip-hop, R&B and general pop music have histories of melodies and rhythms that are stooped in a jazz background that people may not be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just trying to touch on that thing of a sort of popular culture audience, what they might get from jazz.
That's quite complex, actually. It's good because, you know, jazzers and jazz music can be seen as the sort of highbrow, and to a degree, from a technical point of view, as you said, it can be, and it is. There's also classical, but in, you know, I think it's right and fair to say that in any genre, at its excellence, be it reggae, be it funk, be it country, you know, folk, whatever, at its best, there's excellence at every level, which is great. And I think all musicians at that point come together. That's what's brilliant about music. That's the language of music. Again, I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that, but it sort of hints at why we're doing what we're doing. And yeah, I will listen to country records and think, I wonder if there's sort of an element of that could come in. There are hip-hop records, thousands of them, that have got jazz samples, basically, licks, you know, odd parts of the bar even taken that then make up a whole brand new tune and create almost a whole new genre. You know, that stealing from everybody else can be terrible, and it also can be fantastic. But there's great shining examples of that in almost every music now. You know, that mix and match, and also maybe the high finite detail of the music filtering down to your everyday shopping bag of pop music. Sometimes some brilliant things get put in.
Having grown up together, and lived in your house with you, I was very lucky to see and be opened up to an incredible world of jazz and some rather unusual people who would be frequenting the house. And off the top of my head, the names that really stand out was obviously the legendary composer Gil Evans and the legendary jazz trumpeter Dizzy Gillespie. Tell me a little bit about that and about growing up in that world. And
okay. I'll look into the camera for this one. Dizzy sang Happy Birthday to this guy here. So that's quite something. We've got it on recording somewhere.
We are here celebrating your 18th birthday. I wish you many happy returns on your entrance into the realm of manhood. 18 to you. 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 18
So yeah, my dad, I suppose if I can briefly explain him, he worked in television, worked many different things. He worked in television as a sound recordist and as shop steward, but his passion, his hobby was jazz, pretty much throughout everything he ever did. And that he was associated with Ronnie Scott's Club, Tubby Hayes, Pete King, Ronnie Scott himself, all of those guys. I grew up spending a lot of time in Ronnie Scott's when I was little, in the back room, sitting amongst cables, waiting for my dad to come out after the late night sessions. Kind of a good thing, but when you're that little, didn't mean as much as it means to me now. And through those years of him being around that scene and all the English jazzers, basically, he met more and more Americans. Did many recordings of Tubby Hayes and many other, John Sermon, and then he ended up doing some stuff with Gil Evans and did some recordings of Dizzy, which is how he got to know Dizzy in the 70s, I think it was, at Ronnie's. He was doing a 2-week stint at Ronnie's, and my dad just went up to him and said, "Shall I record you tonight?" You know, or they've asked me to record you, I'm not really sure how it goes, but they hit it off immediately. And there was a mutual friend in a guy called Dave Usher, who actually I saw not that long ago, which was fantastic to see him, who managed Dizzy for many years, and they were sort of instrumental as a trio and staying in touch. And obviously I got to meet Dizzy when I was pretty young. I think he watched me play a bit of clarinet and watched me sort of evolve, and then did what Dizzy does for so many kids, kind of saw what my thing was and said, I'm gonna give him a little helping hand. Shall I tell the story as it was?
I would love to hear the story. Early teens, you're at Ronnie Scott's.
At Ronnie Scott's, sitting there thinking, what are we doing here? And there's the congas and all the band's instruments on the stage, and it's sort of, I think it was lunchtime, and Dizzy beckons me on the stage. He says, you want a little conga lesson? I'm like, yeah, great, you know. I see you haven't got any, you've just got, I had these 2 little bongos and some broken up bits of percussion. And he says, let's have, and it's my one and only lesson, and we spent, I don't know, about 40 minutes on stage. He just showed me some basic things that you should know as a percussionist. And then at the end of it said, you know, whilst I'm away, I'm going on tour now, I'll be travelling around the world, I'm going to leave these drums here, his congas, for you to look after. And when I get back, you can, you know, give them back to me. So I'm like, yeah, okay, great. And he went on tour, he left the drums with me, they came into my house, I played them every day. And then he rang us, I don't know, about 6 months later and said, you know, how are you getting on? Are you still practicing? What's happening? Enjoying the drums? Yeah. He said, yeah, I'll see you at some point. Never addressed it and just left the drums with me, and that was his gift to me, and that's pretty much why I do what I do. You know, I wanted to honour that gift, and he set me on my way completely. Bless his heart. He was absolutely amazing. I love him. I used to play backgammon with him when I was a kid as well.
So it's an amazing idea. Me, from a sort of martial arts background, you always have this image of the sensei, Yoda, the great master, gives you... And in the classical kung fu movies, it's the one lesson from the master.
Absolutely.
And this sort of echoes that so brilliantly. You have this one lesson in Ronnie Scott's, and then given these drums at the end of it. You know.
I mean, he's obviously known as a trumpet player, but he's also known as the guy that was massively instrumental in bridging the gap between Latin and jazz. Wasn't the only one, but he had this fantastic relationship with Chano Pozo, the great Latin percussionist, who all the Puerto Ricans and Cubans and Panamanians and the whole of South America, the Latin fraternity, love and adore, to my knowledge. You know, massively instrumental. And Dizzy is loved and adored for what he did, that bridging of the gap of that incredible music, which is incredible music to listen to now. And he had a passion for congas and percussion, and he was actually great. When he really played, he was actually fantastic. And just his time as a trumpet player, I mean, you could talk about that all day long, you know, but a big part of what he did, it was his time, you know, as any great musician will acknowledge. Dizzy's great chops, literally, his great tone, incredible writing, and fantastic feel. You know, and
so you've had this huge sort of pedigree of jazz players come through the house. This influence.
Buddy Rich, Milt Jackson, Gil Evans. Stan Getz. You know.
So now, as you said early on in the interview, that you and Scott had gone through various manifestations of bands until you feel that USONiC is really it for you now. So do you think all that influence, all that stuff is now really come to light to be channeled through one particular band that is USONiC?
Yeah, I think so. I think, but as a session musician, for all the things I've done, and I've done things, you know, flamenco albums, pop albums, more jazz albums for other people, almost everything. I keep coming back to a particular sort of style. We all, hopefully, it's all part of defining yourself as maybe as a human being. You know, my thing is predominantly rhythm and music, and this band helps me define myself. It also helps to tell the tale. I probably can talk about it with a little bit more passion and understanding over a lot of other things in life. Yeah, I'm a little that piece of my history when I was a kid, still beating those drums, wanting to shout that message for Dizzy, you know, and it's a constant thank you, actually, you know, thank you for keeping me on that track. It's opened my heart, my eyes, to music all over the world. It's made me some amazing friends. It's made me appreciate other human beings and what they can achieve as musicians. It's made me want to strive to be a better musician, you know, yeah.
So, I'd just like to say thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's been great to get an insight into what USONiC is, the background of USONiC, the background of you yourself, and what to expect in the future. So, yeah, no, thank you very much. And any message you'd like to extend to the people watching the DV and what pleasure you hope they'd get out of it?
I hope that you get what we're trying to do. I hope that you see it's done with love and passion. And it's not just what we're doing, it's what the engineer's doing, it's what you're doing. It's a collective spirit type of thing. You know, music's a team sport, and I hope that always remains. I found myself speaking on behalf of the rest of the band, but I very much include all of their spirit and influence in what we've done and what we've achieved, and I really hope we can do more of it. Gigging is the thing that we need to do more of, and that's coming. Hopefully you've enjoyed the DVD. It was an absolute thrill to put together. It was an education for us, and hopefully it'll be an interesting insight for you as to what we do. And yeah, I hope it's a pleasure and maybe inspires you to create either your own music or passionately follow what you love, because this is clearly a project of passion with many people included.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. Cool.